Welcome back to Massacre on Muriel Court. In this episode, we're going to discuss possible connections to the Sims murders. The murder of the Bricca family in Cincinnati, Ohio is one of Cincinnati's most notorious cold cases. On Sunday, September 25, 1966, Gerald, aka Jerry Bricca, a 28-year-old chemical engineer, was last seen taking out the trash at his family home on Greenway Avenue in the Cincinnati suburb of Bridgetown between 8:30 and 9 p.m. Jerry was scheduled to go to the airport the following morning to catch a flight to West Virginia with a co-worker for a business trip. Jerry did not make that flight on Monday morning. The co-worker called Jerry over and over that morning to no avail. Later on that Monday, a neighbor grabbed the Bricca's newspaper that was in the driveway and tossed it on the front porch. Now this was when some newspapers were delivered twice a day, the morning and the evening edition. This particular newspaper that the neighbor tossed on the front porch was the evening newspaper. We need to note that here, that the Monday morning newspaper was not outside. This neighbor noticed that the Bricca's outside floodlights had been on the night before, and all that day and into the following night, which was unusual. 2 days later, neighbors noticed the papers had been piling up at the home and thought it seemed suspicious. Linda Bricca would usually be outside with little Debbie Bricca and the two family dogs, Thumper, a Cocker Spaniel, and Dusty, a poodle. But the house was eerily quiet that Tuesday. The trash cans that Jerry had rolled out Sunday night still stood at the end of the driveway. Dick Meyer, a concerned neighbor, tried to call Jerry at work. Meyer learned that Jerry hadn't shown up for work in 2 days. At the insistence of his wife, Dick Meyer and another neighbor, Dick Jansen, went over to the Bricca home to make sure they were okay. After opening the unlocked front door, Meyer, a World War II veteran, recognized the smell of death. He immediately shut the door and called the police.
It's mostly quiet on Muriel Court, but that wasn't the case in 1966 when Robert Sims, his wife Helen, and young daughter Joy found gagged, stabbed, and shot to death.
Safer politically to leave it alone.
Yes, ma'am. Take care of the problem.
Moronic is the word that comes to mind.
He's accusing two top officials of a cover-up.
Standing back there under the banana tree.
Surveillance video of a 1966 FSU football game may be the key to cracking the code in this case gone cold.
You do that.
And while state officials aren't releasing details regarding suspects or persons of interest, they did stress their commitment to finding the Sims killers.
Oh, I think you did it. All of a sudden you became absolutely down, totally obsessed with that.
It's a case that we would certainly like to see solved, and investigators are actively working on the case.
Detectives were notified and responded to the Bricca house, where they found Jerry, his 23-year-old wife Linda, and the couple's 4-year-old daughter Debbie dead in the home. Officers asked Meyer to go in order to identify the dead family. Other than that, the scene was completely secure. According to initial reports, Jerry and Linda were dead in their bedroom. Both had been stabbed multiple times in the chest, neck, and face, and both had been bound at some point. Jerry was found face down and had a sock stuffed in his mouth. Investigators believe someone had stuffed the socks in and then applied tape over the mouth, as he still had a small piece of tape hanging off his chin. Linda was found face up, but there are conflicting reports about her position. Some say she was meticulously placed on top of her husband. Some say she was only slightly on top of him. According to FBI statistics, posing only happens in approximately 1% of murders, so this in itself is a peculiar signature. Debbie, who was found in her bedroom, had also been killed with a knife. According to the autopsy report, Jerry was stabbed 9 times, Linda 8. The primary wounds on both of them were 7 inches deep. Debbie was stabbed 4 times. each thrust piercing completely through her small body. As one investigator observed, it was overkill. The direction of the stab wounds indicated that the killer was left-handed. The assumption, based on the stomach contents and Jerry's co-workers' unanswered calls, is that they died on Sunday night. The murder weapon was never found, which appeared to have possibly been a carving knife taken from the kitchen. According to the Cincinnati Enquirer, the knife was from an Indian carving set fashioned from teak wood and steel, and it was missing from the home. Because little Debbie was of an inquisitive nature, the carving set was never left out in the open. It may have been kept in one of the drawers found standing open when police arrived. Now, Bridgetown was a close community. People looked out for each other, and everyone seemed to know everyone. What I'm trying to say is, neighbors saw things that maybe didn't register until after the murders were discovered. According to author Glenn Wall, in his book titled Zodiac Maniac, on Saturday, approximately 24 hours before the murder, Hamilton County Sheriff's Deputy Ray Hoffbauer, who had just finished his shift, was returning to his Greenway Avenue home. This is the same street that the Brickas lived on. He stopped at his mailbox, noticed a man in a beige jacket standing in the dark about 25 feet away, and seemed to be watching the Bricka home. Deputy Hoffbauer asked the man what he was doing, and the man replied that he was waiting for a friend. Later, Deputy Hoffbauer recalled that the man was tall and slim and appeared to be in his early 20s. Less than 2 hours later, another neighbor noticed a man who appeared to be in his 20s wearing dark pants and a beige jacket. This time the man was pacing back and forth under a streetlight while moving his hands as if he were gesturing to someone or talking to himself. Does this sound familiar? More than one person in the area noticed a bright red sports car parked near the scene at about 5:30 a.m. The car stuck out like a sore thumb. They didn't have many bright red fancy cars in that area. And lastly, Joan Jansen, wife of Dick Jansen, one of the men who found the Brickas, stated that around 4 a.m. that Monday morning, their family dogs went nuts, barking and growling as if someone were outside or possibly cutting through their yard. But despite an extensive investigation spearheaded by the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office, no suspect has ever been named, no murderer has ever been brought to justice. We still don't know who killed the Brickas or why. So let's compare the Bricka case to the Sims case. In both the Sims and the Bricka murders, a mother, father, and female child were murdered. The crimes happened approximately 5 weeks apart. In both cases, there was no sign of forced entry and no sign of robbery. In both cases, it seems as if the family may have known the killer. The TV was left on at both scenes. Both the children were killed brutally, or overkilled, if you will. Both families were bound. There was a possible sexual assault of Linda Bricka. There was a possible sexual assault of Joy Sims. In both murders, a large knife, possibly even a bayonet, had been used. Both Linda Bricka and Joy Sims' bodies appeared staged. The direction of the stab wounds in both cases indicated that the killer was left-handed. The murder weapon was not found in either case. Both Jerry Bricka and Robert Sims had prestigious positions at their place of employment. In both cases, there was a mysterious, tall, slender young man who appeared to be in his early 20s seen around the crime scene, and in both cases, this mysterious man was seen in the street making strange gestures to no one, and both cases are still unsolved. Now let's contrast here. The Sims were shot, and only Joy was stabbed, and the Brickas were only stabbed. The Sims were bound with items from the home, hosiery and etc., while the Brickas were bound with unknown items, possibly medical tape that was taken from the scene. The Bricka murders appeared to be more professional. The killer or killers brought and took away the bindings. The killers also sedated the Brickas' dogs, although there were no dogs in the Sims home. According to HistoryByDay.com, and as noted earlier, the Monday morning paper was missing, so detectives theorized that the killer stayed in the home at least until dawn, possibly even wrapping the knife and evidence in the newspaper and throwing it out in the garbage can. By mid-morning, it would have been on its way to the municipal dump. The killer or killers in the Sims case appeared to be in and out in a hurry. The Bricka's crime scene was secured right away, while the Sims crime scene was a disaster. And the Brickas were in Ohio. The Sims were in Florida. One theory about who killed the Bricka family is the company that Jerry Bricka worked for. Jerry worked for a company called Monsanto in Cincinnati, Ohio. He was in charge of planning for Monsanto's Addison, Ohio installation. The Monsanto Company was an American agrochemical and agricultural biotechnology corporation. The Monsanto's best-known product is Roundup, the herbicide, developed in the 1970s. Later, the company became a major producer of genetically engineered crops. In 2018, the company ranked 199th on the Fortune 500 of the largest United States corporation by revenue. Monsanto was one of 4 groups to introduce genes into plants in 1983 and was among the first to conduct field trials of genetically modified crops in 1987. Monsanto's role in agricultural changes, biotechnology products, lobbying for government agencies, and roots as a chemical company have resulted in many controversies. The company once manufactured controversial products such as the insecticide DDT, PCBs, Agent Orange, and the recombinant bovine growth hormone. Just a brief synopsis of a couple of the many, many lawsuits the company was faced with. In Anniston, Alabama, plaintiffs in a 2002 lawsuit provided documentation showing that the local Monsanto factory knowingly discharged both mercury and PCB-laden waste into local creeks for over 40 years. In 1969, Monsanto dumped 45 tons of PCBs into Snow Creek, a feeder for the Chocoloco Creek, which supplies much of the area's drinking water, and buried millions of pounds of PCB in open-pit landfills located on hillsides above the plant and surrounding neighborhoods. As of November 2013, Monsanto was associated with 9 active Superfund sites and 32 archived sites in the U.S. in the EPA's Superfund database. Monsanto was sued and settled multiple times for damaging the health of its employees or residents near its Superfund sites through pollution and poisoning. In 1966, Monsanto managers discovered that fish submerged in that creek turned belly up within 10 seconds, spurting blood and shedding skin as if dunked into boiling water, and they told no one. Some theorized that Jerry was about to go public with what he knew about what Monsanto was doing, and he was taken out. Linda was killed because Jerry could have confided in her about what he knew. And little Debbie was killed for good measure? Personally, I don't see why a paid assassin would kill the child unless she saw him and could identify him. Another theory in the Bricka case is that a neighbor did it. One man in particular stood out. His name was Fred Leininger, and he not only lived in the same neighborhood, he was the veterinarian that Linda worked for part-time, and the man she was rumored to be having an affair with. Apparently, Linda wanted to break it off with Leininger shortly before the murders. The police spoke to him in September of 1966 while they were gathering background on the Brickas, and then ended up interviewing him again for 45 minutes on October 8th of that year. He was apparently deceitful about his relationship with Linda, but several people came forward to say that they had seen him with Linda walking on back roads or parked in lovers' lanes. During the interrogation, he became very distressed when the investigators contacted his wife. Detectives did speak to Leininger's wife, and she informed them that her husband did not appreciate her speaking to them. She provided no valuable information about her husband or the murders. That's when Leininger called a lawyer and invoked his right to remain silent and refused to cooperate with the police any further. they were never even able to get his fingerprints. According to WCPO Cincinnati, 6 weeks after the killing, Lieutenant Herbert Vogel, who headed the Hamilton County Police investigation, cleared the Bricka's next-door neighbor, Dick Meyer. When he did, the prosecutor at the time, Melvin Ruger, said that narrowed the list of suspects down to one. Ruger did not name him, but the circumstances pointed to Leininger. He said the suspect was, quote, hiding behind his attorney, that he had given a 10-minute interview about his knowledge of the Bricka family and a 40-minute taped interview to Vogel, but he refused to give any samples or speak further. He was never cleared as a suspect, but after the initial interview with him, investigators never went after him any further. He retired in 1995 and moved to Florida. But on February 23, 2004, Leininger and his wife Lynn checked into a hotel in Cincinnati. They both injected themselves with a lethal dose of heroin and put plastic bags over their heads. Fred Leininger died on that day, but Lynn survived. Lynn Leininger lay in a hospital in a coma until she eventually passed away on December 4th of 2004. One neighbor told authorities that a couple months before the murders, Linda Bricka seemed scared of something. Linda even told Debbie's babysitter not to let Debbie play outside. Turns out, two women that Linda used to work and actually live with when she worked for U.S. Airways as an airline stewardess, Lisa Wick and Lonnie Trumbull, were brutally bludgeoned as they slept in their Queen Anne Hills, Seattle-based apartment on June 23, 1966. Originally from Portland, Oregon, both women were working as fledgling flight attendants for United Airlines at the time of the attack and had only been in the apartment for a month, with plans to move into another unit later that week. A third roommate, Joyce Bowe, came home later that morning around 9:30 a.m. As Bowe entered the apartment, she noticed that the front door was unlocked, which was unusual, and the lamp was still on in the living room. When police arrived, it was determined that both women had been repeatedly and viciously clubbed with a blunt object, though neither had been sexually assaulted. Lisa Wick, unconscious and critically injured, was taken to Harborview County Hospital, where she underwent emergency surgery to relieve pressure on her brain caused by multiple depressed skull fractures. Doctors speculated that she only survived the attack because she wore bulky hair rollers to bed, which may have cushioned her somewhat from the blows as they rained down upon her head. Lisa Wick survived the attack but had absolutely no memory of what happened or who the perpetrator was. A 5-pound blood-stained piece of lumber measuring 3 inches thick and 18 inches long, apparently taken from a nearby open garage, was found in a vacant lot next door to the apartments and seemed the likely murder weapon. The only connection found between these attacks and the Bricka murders was the fact that the women knew each other years earlier. Interestingly, the attacks on Lisa Wick and Lonnie Trumbull are speculated to be one of Ted Bundy's first attacks. The MO matched Bundy's earliest confirmed attack on Karen Sparks, who survived, and Linda Healy, who was killed. Both were savagely beaten while sleeping in their beds in Seattle basement apartments. The MO also matched Bundy's massacre in Tallahassee years later at the Chi Omega House, where Lisa Levy, Margaret Bauman, Karen Chandler, and Kathy Kleiner were all bludgeoned as they slept with a piece of wood. In that case, a piece of firewood, picked up from outside of the sorority house. "21-year-old Valerie Percy, an attractive, friendly Cornell University graduate, was bludgeoned to death as she lay asleep in the bed of her Kenilworth, Illinois home on the night of September 18, 1966. She was the daughter of Bell and Howell executive Charles Percy, who was running as a Republican for the U.S. Senate. She had worked hard that summer on her father's campaign. Her killer bolted after stabbing Valerie 14 times with a bayonet. Nothing from the home was stolen. In Lake Michigan, 3 days after the murders, authorities found this bayonet. They also found a glove at the scene. How does this connect to the Bricka case? Well, Linda Bricka and Valerie Percy went to high school together when they both lived in Bridgetown, Illinois, a wealthy suburb outside of Chicago. There had never been a murder in Chicago's richest suburb before. Lieutenant Vogel was intrigued enough that he went to Chicago to talk to investigators working on the Percy case, but they didn't make a connection at the time. But 3 years later, the Illinois State Police investigated some possible links between the Bricka and the Percy murders. Robert Lamb, lead investigator on the Percy case, said there were similarities, but wouldn't comment further. The Bowles family in Crestline, California. The Bowles family had recently built a small cabin on the outskirts of town to escape the hustle and bustle of Orange County on the weekends. On the weekend of August 13, 1965, the family of four had piled into the car and made their way up the winding mountain roads to their new getaway. When James, 41, Darlene, 37, and their two boys, Tommy, 13, and Bobby, 12, hadn't returned to their full-time residence in Orange County by Monday, the 16th of August, extended families started to worry. In the August 20th, 1965 edition of the Crestline Courier.
At 5:15 p.m. Monday, August 16, 1965, Mr. Floyd Melvin Rice of Long Beach reported finding 3 human bodies and a dog, all dead. The Bowles car was also missing. Deputies O'Toole, Dean Giroux, and Richard Wagner proceeded to the scene of the crime and found a small dog lying on the couch, and upon entering the rear bedroom, observed a man and a woman and one child laying in the corner of the bedroom near the closet. Subsequent investigation disclosed one other victim lying under his mother and covered with clothing. The victims were James A. Bowles, who was 41, his wife, Darlene, 37, and their 2 sons, Bobby, who was 13, and Tommy, 12, all of Fountain Valley in Orange County. Apparently, the family was led into the bedroom and shot there by the assailant. Sheriff's officers found approximately 30 rounds of spent ammunition at the scene from a .22 caliber gun. The house was just completed by a local contractor, and the family was spending their first weekend here. All available manpower from the sheriff's office is directing their attention to the investigation. Investigating for the sheriff's office were Detectives William Patterson, Robert Martinchek, Charles G. Rick, Marcus Grounds, and Charles E. Callahan. Also aiding the investigation were 2 crime lab investigators, James M. White and Robert G. Cranston. Anyone who has any information that could help the sheriff's office in the apprehension of the assailant, please call the local sheriff's office. Reportedly, early Tuesday morning, detectives located the family's missing 1962 red Dodge sedan that was subject of an all-night search in the Crestline area. The car was found near the cabin. Officers from the Identification Bureau went to the scene to dust the car for fingerprints. Sheriff Bland indicated that the robbery may have been a motive since all identification and money had been removed from a wallet found on a table. Maybe the motive was robbery, but we don't know, Bland said. Investigators said the family was last seen alive early Saturday evening strolling in the nearby Crestline Shopping Center. Detectives were making a house-to-house canvass yesterday trying to locate persons who may have seen suspicious persons in the area of the Bowles cabin or who might have heard anything out of the ordinary.
Numerous .22 caliber shell casings were found strewn about the bedroom, and 35 casings were eventually found throughout the cabin, including 5 in the living room and 30 in the back room. James was laying on his back on the floor of the bedroom in a pool of blood. 13-year-old Bobby was in a sitting position back to the wall. Darlene was found in a crouched position in the closet, indicating she had been shielding her youngest son, Tommy, at the time of their deaths. The wallet James carried was found in the cabin, but contained no money, which was deemed unusual. All of the family members had numerous fatal gunshot wounds to the head and chest area, as well as wounds to the limbs and extremities. Although authorities had several suspects over the years, Darlene's ex-husband, Harvey M. Fulton, a man named George Robert Stewart, who was a church camp counselor and suspected in another murder of 2 young boys, the brutal murder of the Bowles family is still unsolved. Now, comparing the Bowles family murders to the Sims and the Brickas. All the Bowles family murders were shot. None were stabbed. It happened in California, while Bricca was in Ohio and Sims was in Florida. Money appeared to have been taken in the Bricca and Bowles case, but not in the Sims case, and there appeared to be no sexual element in the Bowles case. The car was stolen in the Bowles case, but not in the other cases. The dog was killed in the Bowles case. The dogs were sedated in the Bricca case. Hypothetically, the killer or killers could have been more prepared by the time they attacked the Briccas a little over a year later. There were no female children killed, only boys, but there were only boys in the family, so you can look at that either way. Please tune in next week for more possible connections to the Sims murders and part 1 of a very interesting interview. If you'd like to support the show, please consider joining our Patreon page at patreon.com/Palmahawk Media. On Patreon, you'll not just have access to early and ad-free episodes, exclusive content for Massacre on Muriel Court, but also access to everything Palmahawk Media, including Paradise After Dark podcast. Thanks for listening.